Welcome, members, guests, and speakers. Thank you all for attending in person and online. For our October general meeting, we've invited an expert panel to cover an important topic: Housing Transit Reinvestment Zones, enhancing affordable housing and public transit. Thanks to Nancy Cancer for arranging this panel. As is our tradition, the League of Women Voters of Salt Lake would like to begin tonight's meeting by acknowledging that we are gathering on Indigenous land. The Salt Lake Valley has always been a gathering place for Indigenous people, and we acknowledge that this land, which is named for the Ute people, is the traditional and ancestral home of the Shoshone, Paiute, Goshute, and Ute nations, and is a crossroad for Indigenous peoples. We pay respect to the elders, past and present. We also consider the many legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement that are our history and legacy, and seek to uncover the truth. For 100 years, the League of Women Voters has been a nonpartisan activist grassroots organization that believes voters should play a critical role in democracy. We encourage informed and active participation in government, work to increase understanding of major public policy issues, and influence public policy through education and advocacy. Simply put, our mission is to empower voters and defend democracy. We would like to acknowledge and celebrate 8 new individuals who have joined the League in September. If you are present or online, please indicate. Carol Diner, Elaine Glick, Jesse Gravitt, Jasmine Kirby, Nate Lacey, Brittany Parks, Becky Sorolla, Olivia Vinny. Welcome. A recording of tonight's event will be made available to the public on the League of Women Voters of Salt Lake website and on our social media. Other recordings of this event, whether they be in person or of a computer screen, may not be used without the express written approval of the League. The League will only allow audio-video of this event to be broadcast in its entirety, except by media reporting on the event. This is actually a meeting, and so at the conclusion of our panel discussions, there will be various announcements and short discussions about meeting topics. But now we want to turn to the matter at hand. Tonight, our panel will be moderated by Haley Keller, the League's Environmental Transportation Chair. Haley works for Salt Lake City Community and Neighborhood Division in Transportation, and Haley is studying as a graduate student in the City and Metropolitan Program. So, Haley, welcome.
Oops. I'd like to introduce our speakers. Miranda Jones-Cox, who's from the Wasatch Front Regional Council, Beth Holbrook from UTA, Rob Sant from Sandy City, Kate Werrett from Salt Lake City, Turner Britton from SLC Neighbors for Neighbors. So Miranda Cox is the Government Affairs Manager for Wasatch Front Regional Council, a metropolitan planning organization and association of governments for Box Elder, Davis, Morgan, Salt Lake, Tooele, and Weber counties. In her role, Miranda plays a critical part in furthering the work of WFRC to promote state and federal legislative priorities and implement policies aligned with the Wasatch Choice Vision and unified and regional transportation plans. Before joining WFRC in 2021, Miranda served as a budget and policy analyst at the Utah Governor's Office of Management and Budget, specializing in infrastructure policy. Prior to GOMB, Miranda was able to work for various congressional, state, and local elected officials. Miranda holds a master's degree in public policy from the University of Utah and a bachelor's degree in economics and political science from Southern Utah University. Miranda and her husband Tanner reside in Bluffdale with their daughter Lucy and love exploring Utah's great outdoors. Beth Holbrook, the UTA trustee, she brings a wealth of experience to UTA. She began her career in the financial sector, established a real estate firm, and went back into the financial sector working in business development. Trustee Holbrook, would go on to work with the public sector for a private company. Trustee Holbrook was first elected to the Bountiful City Council in 2007 and has served on several boards, including the Bountiful Power Commission, Planning Commission, and the Utility Facility Review Board with the Public Service Commission. She is a former president of the Utah League of Cities and Towns. Since being appointed to UTA Board of Trustees, Trustee Holbrook has worked to increase community engagement throughout Davis, Weber, and Box Elder counties. She serves on the ADC Utah and Vision Utah Association of Special Districts Boards, chair of ULI of Utah Advisory Committee, as well as Affordable Housing Commission and chair of Aline Walker Housing Fund as a TOD specialist. She also works with APTA, the American Public Transit Association, as a transit board member, as well as the chair of the Transit Board Members Legislative Subcommittee. Rob Sant is the Deputy Director of the Sandy Economic Development / RDA Department. Rob assists with managing the implementation of the city's strategic plan, business development program, and the redevelopment agency's activities. Rob has extensive experience with redevelopment in Utah. Before joining the team at Sandy, he was vice president at a major economic development consulting firm and was previously the economic development division director at Davis County. When not at work, Rob loves spending time with his wife and his 2 daughters, traveling, golfing, going to the movies, and all things sports. Kate Werrett is a project manager with the redevelopment agency of Salt Lake City. Kate brings a unique perspective with her fusion of professional experience in finance and city planning. As a public finance consultant, she conducted municipal feasibility studies, created community reinvestment areas, and advised cities regarding affordable housing and economic development. Kate received a Bachelor of Science in Business Management with an emphasis in finance from BYU and a Master of City and Metropolitan Planning from the University of Utah. Some of her current top priorities include managing HTRZ efforts and working the numbers to make RDA-assisted affordable housing projects a reality. Turner Britton, founder of Salt Lake City Neighbors for Neighbors, is a lifelong Utahn raised on a cattle farm west of Ogden. Imbued with a love of service to his community by his parents, Turner has dedicated his adult life to working in the nonprofit sector. Turner is the founder of and executive director of SLC Neighbors for More Neighbors and is recognized as a leader and serves the community through volunteer service with nonprofit organizations as well as appointed positions in local and state government. Turner lives with his husband Chase and dogs Melon and Moose in the Glendale neighborhood of Salt Lake City, where he also serves as the elected community council chair. First. Kate, all right, Kate, if you want to get.
Okay.
Miranda. Sorry about that, everyone.
We'll get going. Appreciate the opportunity to come and share a little bit about HTRZs. And Beth and I were talking about how we were wondering like, what would the league want to know about HTRZs? Because it is kind of a niche topic area. And so we're excited to share a little bit more about it with you, and maybe why it's important or at least relevant. So my name is Miranda Jones Cox. I'm the Government Affairs Manager at the Wasatch Front Regional Council. So we do transportation planning for the Wasatch Front area. We work in close coordination with our local partners and state partners, so with UDOT, UTA, cities and counties, in order to plan for our communities, transit-oriented communities being part of that. WFRC doesn't really have any direct role in approving HTRZs or proposing HTRZs, but WFRC was somewhat instrumental, along with other partners, in the creation of the HTRZ tool through legislation with Utah Senator Wayne Harper. And so what I am going to spend a little bit of time on is just kind of giving a broad overview of what HTRZs are. And then Beth, after me, will share a little bit of 2 HTRZ examples of some projects that were recently approved. So let's get into it. Housing and Transit Reinvestment Zone Act, or HTRZ. What are HTRZs and what are we trying to accomplish with them? HTRZs are primarily a tool to help accommodate Utah's affordable housing crisis. This isn't news to anyone, right? There's major housing pressures that we're seeing lately, and HTRZs are a tool to facilitate mixed use, multifamily, and affordable housing development near transit stations. Transit stations are one of the best places in our communities to accommodate and to absorb growth within our communities, largely because it creates a transit-oriented community where the residents have access to transit as a form of transportation. And if they're done well in a mixed use, way, other goods, services, and access to opportunities. And that's why transit-oriented development is such a critical piece to help advance affordable housing. So what other objectives are an HTRZ supposed to accomplish? Here I've noted what is actually listed in statute for HTRZs. So higher utilization of public transit, availability and affordability of housing, water conservation, improving air quality, encouraging mixed use development, strategic land use, walkability, access to employment and educational opportunities, etc. So HTRZs are required to address all of these outcomes and all of these objectives. And I'll get into that a little bit more. But to kind of get to the nuts and bolts, what is an HTRZ? So an HTRZ allows for sales tax increment, or in other words, the growth in tax revenue from a baseline period to be captured and used for specific development purposes. We'll share a little bit more about what types of development purposes, but these are all local taxes. And it's important to note that the taxes going into an HTRZ are from all local taxing entities. So cities, counties, school districts, that all is captured in the incremental revenue. Second, HTRZs are limited in their proposal to a specific radius around a transit station. That radius is dependent upon what type of transit station it might be at, but it does limit how large the HTRZ can be, total acres, and how long an HTRZ can be implemented and capture that tax revenue. So it's not indefinite. As I mentioned, it should promote certain transit-oriented development objectives, requires that a percentage of the housing units in an HTRZ be affordable units. That requirement is 10% of all units. And in addition to that, zoning should be in place before an HTRZ is approved. This is to ensure that the development follows the zoning and that the city and developer are working in coordination together. And then lastly, it requires, an HTRZ proposal requires approval and analysis to ensure that the public dollars that are being used to supplement this development or are being used effectively. So quickly on the process, a city can propose an HTRZ along with a development partner. That goes to an independent gap analysis. Currently, Zions Bank Public Finance is contracted out to do these independent gap analyses for the HTRZ proposals. And basically, the gap analysis determines if the HTRZ meets the statutory requirements in order to be approved. And then the independent gap analysis results is given to the HTRZ committee to review and ultimately approve. So as I mentioned, use of tax increment can be used for a number of things. I'll note that it's not just for transportation costs, not just for transit related costs, but for a number of other things, income targeted housing costs, structured parking, which can often be an impediment to these types of developments and making those developments pencil. Paying costs of the bonds issued by the municipality for this project, etc. So really a number of things that the tax increment can be used for. And this slide right here, I'll note is there's a lot going on here, but we're going to walk through it. It's a little bit tricky. There's so much here. So on the left, you'll see variable requirements and standard requirements. So, and then to the right, you'll see types of transit modes. So you'll see commuter rail, light rail, or bus rapid transit. And the HTRZ requirements differ by the type of transit that it is around. So for example, you'll look at units per acre or density requirements. So HTRZ requires that there's an average of 50 units per acre for around commuter rail, light rail, and then around BRT, that's a little bit less. Part of the reason why it'd be less around BRT is because development potential may not be as great as it would be around, say, a commuter rail station or front runner, right? So that's our commuter rail system here on the Wasatch Front. Light rail meaning tracks throughout the city, and then BRT, bus rapid transit. So think OGX now up in Weber. There is UVX down in Utah County, and some other planned BRT routes on the horizon. I mentioned that there's a required radius around HTRZs, so that also differs by the type of transit. How many total acres can be included in an HTRZ differs. Also notably, the tax increment that can be captured also differs. So 80% of that tax increment growth can be captured in an HTRZ. But again, for BRT, that's limited to slightly less at 60%. And another thing to note is that there's a limit on the number of HTRZs that can be approved. Part of the reason why this is because certain counties like Salt Lake County specifically has probably the most transit stops and stations compared to other counties. And if let's say every station were to be developed in an HTRZ, that would be an undue burden on Salt Lake County and the city, because of it would be capturing all that tax increment growth for those set number of years. And so by having a limit on the number of HTRZs that can be approved, it still allows those taxing entities to not have all of their future tax revenue growth to be captured for HTRZs. Affordable units, like I mentioned, 10% for every station. Mixed use is required. I have noted here that a percentage of units need to be greater than one bedroom. That's to to promote more family housing as opposed to just, studios or things like that. And then lastly, I think one thing that's important to note is that this, not only local tax increment is being captured here, but the state sales tax will also be captured in an HTRZ zone. 15% of the state sales tax will go into the TTIF, which is called the Transit Transportation Investment Fund. This is the fund that is used to fund transit capital projects across the state. And so not only are local entities, putting their tax revenue in, the state is also has skin in the game here. As I mentioned, just the independent gap analysis is done. The GOEO, so Zion's Public Finance works in coordination with the Governor's Office of Economic Opportunity, or GOEO. This is the state entity that ultimately administers the HTRZ program and works with communities that are applying for HTRZs. As mentioned, the gap analysis does a market analysis on comparable developments, evaluates the amount of public financing needed for a development, and gives an opinion on the appropriate amount of public financing that is needed to achieve the HTRZ objective. So in other words, would this development be possible but for the public investment into the HTRZ? And the gap analysis should educate the committee on that. Here I have just a little bit about the committee, who's on the committee. Here mentioned a board of trustee from the Public Transit District. That's Beth. Trustee Holbrook, she'll be sharing a little bit about maybe her experience and some of the projects out there. Someone from the State Treasurer's Office, Transportation Commission, members from appointed from the legislature. So there's really quite a bit of members on here, and also all of the taxing entities are included on the HTRZ committee to make sure there's representation from those taxing committees. And so with that, there's a lot, might be a little confusing, hopefully not too confusing, but maybe I'll turn it over, Beth, if you want to share a few examples.
I would be happy to. Thank you, Miranda. You can see why I gave her all of the wonky details. She did a fabulous job. My name is Beth Holbrook, and I'm a trustee for Utah Transit Authority. And I have been in this role almost 5 years. And one of the fascinating things is how we are now talking more collectively about how can we manage growth effectively. And I know that in some areas that's, a little more nuanced, if you will. But this is an option that the state has taken upon itself to kind of figure out strategies to maximize what I would call our infrastructure. So a lot of UTA's infrastructure is already embedded. For instance, talking about commuter rail, our front runner, our stops are already established. They're not all developed out. And so this is an opportunity to really maximize that option. I will say this candidly, if you're going to do strategic density, this is an ideal place to do that. As Miranda mentioned, the elements are already there. But in addition to that, you now also are doing a development that has affordable housing. It also has mixed use. And by definition, a really good transit-oriented, and I like to say transit-oriented community. Development is certainly the legal terminology, and a development talks about X acreage at this location. But a community is really how you're connecting to that transit stop. And that's one of the key things is if you are in a situation like in Utah, where we have affordability challenges on our housing markets, if you can get rid of a cost structure in your budget, in your personal homeowner's budget, then you are now in a better position. And that's the goal and the intent of the HTRZ. And if I am going to really figure out a strategy, what I'm also going to do to make that work is I'm going to have really good sidewalks, wider sidewalks than your standard. I'm going to have active transportation access. I'm going to have bike shares and other electric options like scooters, whatever various communities are working on, because that increases not just the value of living in this location, but the connectivity pieces, which we think are really critical moving forward. So this picture is of Daybreak in South Jordan City, and Daybreak was our most recent approval. And as Miranda mentioned, I sit on the HTRZ committee, and I love that we're talking about this, by the way. So I will get really wonky, but I'll try not to. The discussion is there's a core group of us. So I sit on there with some legislators, and then the state's GOEO commission has a member there, and then the tax commission and UDOT. So we're like that core group. But then what we do is, depending upon the location, so for instance, for Daybreak, you can see the vision that they have with this intention. How can they maximize all of these spaces? How can they make this a livable, walkable, connected community? So they're involved. So when they did their presentation, Mayor Don Ramsey of South Jordan was the presenter on that, because who better to speak to your community development than your mayor? And also the school district that location resides in. And so these shift around. And so they also had the water district as well. Again, key infrastructure is actually, I know I'm saying this, but it's more than just rail. It is also water, sewer, electric, power lines, fiber. These are core things that we use when we're maximizing our opportunities. And if we're already investing in this, then let's maximize that opportunity. Thank you. So as a practical matter, what GOEO does, or Science Public Finance does, is they draw this circle around this station area, and then they articulate some of the zones that would be maximized as a result of this vision plan that the city presented to us. And they talk about this area is going to have maybe real dense housing, and density again is 50 units per acre. And as you're doing a development, one of the things that you also have to consider is there is still vehicles in some of these things, but the parking requirements might differ as a result of having this maximization of transit access. But you also want to talk about your livable space, your sidewalks, all of these other access points. And this is really what this does is define this by the boundary, and it defines how the tax increment capture is going to maximize this area. So when you're doing some CRAs, they are citywide or they're in other areas, but this is very defined specific to this. And this is why we have the local mayor, the local water district representative, the school districts, because this is their community, and they're going to be the ones to be impacted on this. Let's see if I can do both at the same time. So as you look at this, and this is what I always like to tell people, this is a vision plan. And so you envision what the station itself is. So the station itself, front runner in this case, it's tracks, the red line. And so you envision a tracks vehicle, you envision the station, so the platforms that they are on, and then how do you get to those platforms? So if you notice that there is identifiable markers throughout this project, and it really talks about how they can maximize it. And for context, I think we're all somewhat familiar with Daybreak. We know how that is a really incredibly uniquely dense development that doesn't look like it has as many units as it does. I mean, you can see pictures of it online where it's a triplex and it looks like a single family. The goal here for South Jordan was to continue to maximize that. One of the components of a transit-oriented community that I think is really critical is you have to be able to get to access to food. So grocery is one of those mixed use elements that's going to really maximize the value. Access to childcare in the state of Utah, that is a key component. And we all know those challenges. I have adult children now, but I remember those times very vividly still. And the other element is access to lifestyle. And as you are an individual looking to stretch your household dollars, then how you access all of those elements is really critical. So South Jordan, here's just the nuts and bolts. 65 units an acre. So they went above and beyond the 50 as required. As you can see, the retail space, 286,000 square feet, 1.5 million square feet of office space. Affordability requirements, 500 units are 60 to 80% AMI. And so that's average median income of that particular location. There's a lot of acronyms in what I do, so I apologize. The other element that you're going to take a look at is what South Jordan did at the legislators' request, I guess you could call it, kind of like this, like, what can we do to really even just bump it up a little bit? So this actually ended up with 11.7% of affordable housing units, which is higher than the requirement of 10. And I think that by going in and really just crunching the numbers and trying to maximize this, they really created a really incredibly valuable project moving forward. So the gap analysis obviously talks about the 512 million. And the HTRZ piece, so that gap financing area covers 160 million of that. One of the challenges for UTA is we have a park and rides, and they're almost always asphalt, flat, maybe $3,000 to $5,000 per parking stall is the cost. A lot of times that's the land we want to use. So we have to have structured parking. Structured parking is about $30,000 a single stall. So you consider that that's going to up your price a lot really quickly. And what this does is, again, the HTRZ piece is going to cover some of those required elements. Now, there could be other required elements, like maybe there's going to be an active trail that's nearby, like the Jordan River Trail, for instance. How can they get that access? Those are other things that the state funding can utilize. And it's usually identified as they present their project. The goal is, of course, ridership for UTA, but it's so much more than that, because we can't do this without the connectivity pieces. I mean, we could have the most amazing station, but if no one can get to it, or it's very limited, it is not the maximized value. So here's another city in Utah County, Vineyard City. Vineyard City, I'm just going to do an interesting shout out to them, because one of the things that they did is there are no height restrictions. They could build a 100-story building if they so chose, which I think is, wow, whew, mind blown. This is their project plan. This is a Frontrunner station that was recently opened. And for context, we opened this station year and a half, maybe 2 years ago. The park and ride is full. In fact, people are parking on the street as it goes to the station. It is so well utilized. And so this is the proposal to really create this walkable area. And if you can see this, I know it's a little tricky, but you can see kind of these wider, like almost like green spaces. These are those active walking access points. Here's the nuts and bolts, because I know I've been talking a lot and I'm super passionate about this. So you guys are welcome to ask any questions. 7.8 million square feet of residential. That's a huge lift. They've got retail, again, grocery, childcare. These are core needs in a community. Square foot office space, as it says, unlimited height and density. So theoretically, they could build something that we wouldn't necessarily see in the state of Utah. That is the market that's going to determine that. And the city is totally okay with that, because cities all control the land use and zoning. And then there's the density piece. Again, they went above and beyond the 10% of the affordable requirement. And they're at, I think, 80% AMI down in that area. And for context, Vineyard already has a large number of multi-units. So they are looking at how can they get everybody to the station and create a lifestyle. That's their goal. And you can see the objectives and everything else. And so this, please use the QR code. This is going to give you some really super detailed information. But again, if we are going to manage our growth strategically and effectively, this is an investment in strategic density, which I think is ultimately going to be of maximum value to the cities we serve. So thank you.
Thanks, Beth, for that. So I'm Rob Sant, Deputy Director at Sandy City. We were actually the first city that created an HTRZ. Before I get into that, one quick other thing about HTRs, it's important to note is that mixed use, 51% has to be residential. So it has to have the majority of that development has to be residential to help promote that affordability. So our HTRZ is in our Cairns area, which is kind of a long master plan that we went through. It was approved in 2015. It's 1,100 acres. And a lot of it is in traditional project areas before the HTRZ tool was created. And so we already have that financing in place, and we're already using that to promote that development. But a good thing about our Cairns area too is we don't limit the height, we limit how low they could be. So there have to be at least 6 stories for residential units, and then higher for office. So the higher the better for us as well. And our HTRZ was really unique in it wasn't one of these big grand 100-acre project areas. It was site specific to one apartment building that had some gaps in financing due to it's a really narrow lot. And then we require in our Cairns area that the ground floor has to be commercial. And so because of that, it's got a little bit higher of a footplate. And so they lost some units on that. And then it butted a target. And so they had some fire restrictions and things that just made it so they lost about 30 units that they would have been able to build if it was a market type of development. So they approached us to see if they could qualify for some tax increment. And unfortunately, they were across the street from an existing CRA. And so we told them that, there's a new tool. It's an HTRZ. It's never been created before. This project maybe isn't an ideal example of what an HTRZ could be, but we'll try to get it through. And by not ideal, Beth highlighted on a bunch of really important things of HTRZs. It was a 1/3 mile from the front runner station, but the front runner station was actually across the freeway. So it was on the South Jordan side. But what we have is there's a connector. It's sat right between a front runner station, and then we have a track station that's in our transit-oriented development or community in Sandy City. And we have a connector bus that goes through every 20 minutes, a circulator that connects some of our office in that Cairns area to the front runner station and to the track station. So we're able to promote rideability through that and walkability, but that was kind of a big hurdle that we knew we'd have to overcome. And so as we got into, we were also the guinea pig. I think that was a big thing to say is we're the first one in. As you create CRAs and you create economic impact studies, there's a lot of times a template that you could use that say, okay, this was been a successful plan that went through. Let's maybe use that as an example that we could then build our model and our application off of. We were the first to the door. So we didn't really have an example of, hey, this is a successful HTRZ. So we went in and we had the meeting, and we asked for $4.5 million, and we were approved for $1.5 million. And that was due to that Zion's gap study. They identified that maybe some of the gaps that we had could be offset by the market. But because we were promoting that affordability in the housing, that is a true gap that they would help finance. And so we were approved for $1.5 million. And since then, as we all know, the market's kind of tanked. Interest rates have really increased. We were meeting with a developer the other day, and they said just in the last 90 days, their project increased $4 million just because of interest rates and other things like that. So we worked directly with the developer to come up with maybe some alternative financing structures that he could do to help make up that delta between the $1.5 million and the $4 million. And so he's been working with HUD at the federal level to try to get a loan to kind of make up for that gap. And he's in the process of that. And we hope to have that approved in the spring, and then he'll start construction. So that's kind of the lessons I would say we learned from that is it's really important to show the community and that sense of community that your HTR is going to create. And then also we're looking at maybe is there a way that we can go in and amend our HTRZ and include other development around the front runner station and maybe have access directly to that station through a pedestrian bridge or something that increases that walkability and has kind of that true sense of transit-oriented community. But yeah, that's kind of the lessons we learned.
I love that. And kudos to Sandy because they were the total guinea pigs. And we really appreciated them, even though it was like, oh, there are no models. Well done.
Can you just give us some time frame on when that happened?
Yeah. So we started creating it in March of 21, I want to say. And then by the time we submitted it to the committee or to Zions, it was probably September. And then I believe probably like a 4 to 6 month process, depending on, a lot of important people on the committee. So schedules can be complicated sometimes. I think they've also kind of ironed that out a little bit. But I want to say we submitted our application in June, and then we were in front of the committee in September. And then there's really 2 routes that have gone on. So also, because we're the guinea pigs, I've helped Lehigh, helped South Jordan a little bit. South Salt Lake has just submitted an HTRZ. I helped them as well. So I've helped a lot of other cities kind of, hey, these are the lessons we've learned. Here's some ideas. And one of the important things that they've done is they've met with the committee members before that meeting to kind of say, hey, this is our HTRZ. What are your thoughts? And that's a valuable thing. Is Representative Schultz has said, hey, is there a way you could maybe increase to 12% affordable housing? Is there a way maybe you could do 80% AMIs, that requirement? Is there a way maybe you could do 60, right? Let's try to help with more affordability. So as you've kind of met with those committee members, I think that's also helped that process. So I think that's been kind of the main takeaway. Is it's really important. It truly is. I know they said this is kind of a state and a local team to help offset this affordability issue. And it truly is that type of effort where it takes a team approach of working with the committee members to try to get a project that's beneficial for everybody. And then there's 2 routes you could go. Some cities have hired their financial advisor or an economic development consultant to maybe help them craft their HTRZ application, and others have actually leaned more on the developer of the site. So in Vineyard, you have the Woodburys. In South Jordan, you had Larry H. Miller. In South Salt Lake, there's actually 7 different developers. And so they've relied on them to provide, hey, give us a lot of this data, and then we'll go through and put this application together and then help you present that picture. But yeah, so that's kind of some of the lessons learned.
Thank you, Rob. My name is Kate Warrett. I am a project manager with the Salt Lake City Redevelopment Agency. And are you sharing my PowerPoint? If you want to go ahead and share that. So a little background on Salt Lake City and HTRZs. I feel like within the state of Utah, we have the most opportunity to take advantage of this tool. We have several front runner stations. We have tracks. We have the S line. We have so many bus lines. What we don't have is a BRT. So we're set up very, very well to take advantage of this particular tool. A difference for us compared to other communities is that many of the others, their HTRZs are occurring in greenfield areas, whereas we are looking at infill or redevelopment projects typically. I was asked today to speak about addressing the process that Salt Lake City is following to consider HTRZs and the locations that we're looking at. So I'm going to be sharing a bunch of different maps with you. So Rob mentioned a few times a term CRA. That's a different type of project area that redevelopment agencies take advantage of. And what you can see on this sheet is Salt Lake City's CRAs throughout the city. The main clumping of the variety of colors that's pretty much the central business district and the surrounding area there. Within the next couple of years, that middle area is going to disappear. So Salt Lake City is quite large, but down where that colorful area is where most of our transit is. So WFRC has provided an interesting map that shows where HTRZs can be located within the state. And this just shows you within Salt Lake City where they could be, and the different radius of the circles is dependent on the type of project area or type of HTRZ that could be in place in those areas. So as you can see, there are many opportunities in Salt Lake City. I think this is part of the reason that I was asked to talk on what our process is on deciding where we want to put an HTRZ, because as has been mentioned, there's a limit. on how many HTRZs can be created. And we also, we want to focus on particular areas in the city. We don't want the whole city to be in an HTRZ. So here are those state objectives. We've been over them a few times, but many of those state objectives align with the city's objectives and what we are looking at moving forward. Number one, for what I tend to deal with, the projects I deal with, is that affordable housing. There is such a shortage in affordable housing right now, and this has given us a great opportunity to provide funding to the city and private developers to make that a better situation and to provide housing for those that need it. There's been a lot of talk about the eligible uses already, but this has really helped us with determining where to go. We have both public and private projects that are very interested in these funds, and because of that, it's made it important for us to discuss internally how to be equitable, and also where we can provide the best support for our residents and our future residents. Where do they want to live? Where do they want to work? And how do we make it so that those two things coincide? And so we've been taking a good look at where potential locations could be. These are not all the locations we're considering, but they are several of them, and some of them may become other types of project areas as well. We have, in fact, submitted one HTRZ application that will be getting reviewed in November for the 900 South, 200 West track station. As you can see here, that's pretty close to the 600 South Main Street track station. We actually have, at this time, removed our plan to submit an application for that 650 South Main Street station due to the majority of the interest falling within the radius that is allocated to the 900 South station. So we look at the need, we look at where people want to live, and then we proceed from there. I just want to show you, this is going to be our next application that we submit for review. It's the intermodal hub right downtown. It's a front runner station. What you can see here, that green circle is the radius that we can work within. You can see that that Salt Lake City and the redevelopment agency, the RDA, we own a lot of land in that area. So we have a lot of say on what gets built, and we're really excited about this particular project. This is our most exciting HTRZ for us. It wasn't our first application, but this is the one we are most excited about. There's a lot of proposed height going in here. We currently have a design team, a consultant that's working on plans. One of the proposed buildings is 400 feet tall. So we are going high, and we are pushing the limits, and that building is going to be residential, and we are hoping to have a lot of family housing in there, as well as family housing in other buildings within the community. You can see some other areas in here where there's potential for public benefit and amenities. We have the green loop shown. This is shown on a few of the different maps. That is a citywide park that we are looking forward to having built, and we intend to use some of the HTRZ funds to help that happen. If you've been to the East Coast, these are fairly common out there, and it just brings a lot of life and fun and makes it a better place for families to be. Let's go ahead and look at the next one. So here we have the application that we have submitted. You can see here, we own the RDA and Salt Lake City own a bit of land here as well. Fleet Block in particular is a location that the city owns. And you can see the green loop going through here and the Grand Boulevards. So with this application, there's been a lot of talk about the affordable housing, and that's part of the reason that this was our first application. There's a lot of development occurring in this area right now, and what we want is that development to include things that we feel the city needs. And number one on that list is affordable housing. So the city or the state, excuse me, requires that 10% of the units be affordable at 80% AMI. With this application, we have proposed that 20% of the units be affordable, and we are shooting for 60% AMI. So that is our goal, and that is our aim. Just so you're aware of what that means in real numbers, 80% AMI for a one-person household is just under $60,000. For 60% AMI for one-person household, it's about $44,000. So those are the income levels that we are talking about. In this application, we are looking at about 10,000 housing units. So that's 2,000 units that will be affordable, which I think is really exciting. With this one, some of the funds that we are asking for will go to public development projects, and then some will go to private development. On the public side, as I mentioned, the green loop that will receive some funds. Also, the infrastructure in this area is aging and was built for warehouse and industrial uses. When we're looking at it now and we're talking about housing and office, that's a completely different type of infrastructure for the streets and the sewer systems and the water. It's also in a floodplain, so there's some work there that is needed. So we are looking forward to promoting the bike and walking to improve in this area. Interesting fact, there's more bicycle users here than there are walkers. They've done some studies, and this is a major biking area, and that green loop should help promote that even more. So we have the green loop. We're looking forward to improving the streetscapes and increasing safety and improvements. It's a major jaywalking area we found also. So hopefully we can help solve that problem. And then some of the funds will also go to public transit support, we anticipate. We also plan on supporting the private development with helping them with affordable housing, sustainable development. We have a policy in place that will promote better buildings with 100% electric systems in place. We're also going to encourage structured parking to allow for better land use and conserve our land for better usage across the board. And we will put money into public art and other public benefits. So those are just some of the reasons that we selected this application first. Like I mentioned, we're not going to do our 650 Main Street track stop at this time. That may change in the future, but there just wasn't a demand for it. Another potential location that we've talked about, we've gone back and forth on, is the ballpark. I think everyone here is fairly aware of what's going on down here. We were in fact able to put one of these parcels that the city owns into the 900 South HTRZ, which we were really excited that the circle went that far. So at this time, we are probably not doing this HTRZ either, just because we were able to meet that need with a different stop. Another location that has been discussed is the Sugar House area. We're not sure if this will happen or not, but for every area, there are different public benefits that could come to a place. As I mentioned, we're looking at that live, work, and play. There's a lot of living that occurs in this area, but it maybe not a lot of affordable living. So that would be most likely a focus that we would have here as well. So our next steps, we are meeting with the governor's office, their HTRZ committee next month. And then after that, we look forward to submitting our next HTRZ application for the intermodal hub. So that's where we're at. So thank you very much.
Good evening. So my name's Turner Britton. A year ago, I founded an organization called SLC Neighbors for More Neighbors. And this organization came out of my personal experience trying to find housing in Salt Lake City and make my way down to Salt Lake City. And I remember a very specific moment that was really the genesis for this organization. And I had COVID. I was stuck in a hotel room in Switzerland in May of last year. And I was watching the public hearing for a proposal that Salt Lake City has been considering called the Affordable Housing Incentives. And essentially what this would allow is if a developer includes affordable housing in a construction of a development, they could receive a density bonus. So maybe an additional floor, maybe additional units, reductions in setbacks, all the things that really contribute to costs for developers. And the reason that this type of policy is so important is the market historically has a hard time delivering affordability. We talked a little bit about the gap that exists when you're subsidizing a unit or when you're asking a developer to build a unit that they weren't budgeting for. The term is penciling out, which doesn't make sense if you're not in the development world. But essentially, when you're putting your budget together, if you're being asked to take on unfunded mandates, it's going to reduce your desire to carry out any of those things, and two, just the practicality of bringing a project to fruition is going to decrease as you add on additional costs. So while we all want to see affordable housing, without incentivizing and aligning with the needs of the development community, we're likely not going to see that unless the government is putting up money for it, which those budgets are stretched thin as it is. So I was sitting in Switzerland watching this meeting, and at this meeting, there were folks that had shown up, and some of them were insinuating that there were bulldozers just waiting outside of City Hall, ready to go into every neighborhood, start tearing it down and building apartment complexes. And then there were other folks there that were saying that this policy wasn't going to do a single thing. And looking at the work that the city had gone through to craft this policy, to take into account all of these different interests, I was incredibly frustrated by this conversation. And as a community council chair, I was first elected in 2020. And the number one thing that I hear about is housing. And now it's our school district, number two, both of which are tied together. So our school district is looking at closing up to 7 elementary schools right now. And that is a direct result of our housing policy. We have not, as a city, been able to produce the amount of housing that we've needed because about 30 years ago, we downzoned our entire city and we protected and insulated single-family neighborhoods in a way that has constricted supply in neighborhoods like Glendale. And so when you do that for 30 years, eventually that will catch up with you. And it's catching up with us in the form of a shortage of between 40 and 50,000 units statewide. So when I founded this organization, the main goal was to look at zoning reform. And I'll kind of talk about why zoning reform became our first priority. But to give you an understanding of where I come from personally, so as Haley mentioned in my bio, I grew up on a cattle farm in Western Weber County, pretty idyllic childhood, got to spend a lot of time on the farm, had a lot of space. And then I turned 18 and had to find housing. And at the time I lived in Ogden and I ended up living in a cheap apartment and I found great housing. And then later on in 2012, I was able to buy a house because my parents had told me my entire life, the first thing you should do is try to buy a house. And so I bought my first house at the age of 21. And I tried to move to Salt Lake 2 times after that. And so the first time I tried to move to Salt Lake, we couldn't find anything in our budget. The second time we tried to move to Salt Lake, couldn't find anything in our budget until we finally went and found a house. And we were able to buy it in 2018 at the perfect moment. The reason that I kind of talk about this journey is I'm not representative of folks that are within my age demographic. So I'm 32 years old, and of my probably 30 closest friends, I'm the only one that owns a home. And I would say I'm the only one in the next 5 to 10 years that realistically that's going to be an option for. And most of them make pretty good money. That's the kind of sickening part of all of this, is that they make good money and yet they still can't get that starter home like I did when I was 21. And had I not been able to buy that home in 2021, or excuse me, in 2012 for $89,000, I missed that house payment. But for $89,000, had I not made that initial investment in myself, there's no way that I would be a resident of Salt Lake City today, let alone a resident that owned a home in a great neighborhood. And so for me, as I was looking at this conversation about affordable housing, there was this disconnect for me in that what you see in public meetings is overwhelming opposition to any kind of change within a neighborhood. But it's not a representative sample of the broad public. So when we go out, when the Utah Foundation does its quality of life surveys every year, housing is on that list. When you ask neighbors what they're concerned about, housing is on that list. When you ask people what their number one financial concern is, housing is number one on that list. And so for me, hearing what the issue is from the public, but then seeing the discourse at public meetings, I channeled that frustration into SLC Neighbors for More Neighbors. And basically what we did is we came up with this theory that has proven to be true, that when we show up, when we tell people where to show up and how to show up, and they can voice their support for pro-housing policy, that policymakers are eager to make those decisions. And so looking at things, I'm going to shorthand it transit zones, so I don't have to say the whole thing, but looking at things like this mechanism, this is public policy aligning with the values of the public and delivering thousands of units statewide in a very, very quick manner. It is unbelievable to see the number of units that have come online, how quickly they've come online, and how much they align with our values. And I'll kind of dive into that in a second. But the last thing that I want to say, the reason that we think that zoning is so important in our organization is that historically zoning and land use policy has been a tool of exclusion, that it was created as a way of keeping undesirable members of our communities out of certain neighborhoods. And that legacy persists until today. And so the work that we have to do is not only thinking about the 50, 60,000 units that we're short now, but the housing units that we're going to need if we all keep having kids and we all keep having grandkids. And so what we want to do is make sure that we're building the cities that are going to be inclusive and welcoming of folks, whether they're moving from out of state because our economy is awesome, or they're growing up here in the state of Utah like I did. And so a couple of caveats real quick. My organization is focused exclusively on Salt Lake City. We're focused on Salt Lake City because, one, that's where all the people who are volunteering for our organization came from. And two, because as the capital city and the largest city in the state, we have access to resources and wonderful people that a lot of cities don't. And the reality is that as a capital city, we have an economy within our city that can allow us to make bold choices and to do some things with public policy that a lot of other cities can't. Many other cities don't even have a line item for affordable housing because their budget is so small. Salt Lake City Council and the mayor have been putting millions and millions of dollars into affordable housing. And without partnering with the market and incentivizing the market to also help with affordability, those government dollars are never, ever, ever going to get us to where we need to be. So we need to incentivize construction of all kinds of housing and all types of housing. So I mentioned that zoning reform for us is about healing some of those past mistakes, public policy mistakes. The legacy of redlining is something that it's played itself out for decades, but you're seeing it in wealth disparities, you're seeing it in investments in communities, you're seeing it in places where people have access to transit, because typically neighborhoods that were redlined didn't develop either incrementally or from outside investment in a way that was capable of driving future investment from both the government and from private sources into the kinds of resources that would make a neighborhood walkable, that would make a neighborhood bikeable or livable, quite frankly. And so for us, when we look at zoning reform, what we're trying to do right now is to push the city to be as bold as possible on zoning reform, because the decisions that we make today are not going to solve today's housing crisis. They're about solving in the next 10 years what that next housing crisis looks like. And today, it's about affordability. What I look at for the future is a worry about seniors, is a worry about the folks that currently have access to housing, but that as the market gets more competitive, especially if we don't have supply of a bunch of different types of housing, you're going to see people who built our city pushed out of our city because they can't afford it anymore. And that is something that keeps me up at night, as much as the fact that my friends who live in Eagle Mountain or out in Tooele are driving to work every day at a time when we're worried about our air quality. So I think the important thing to take away about zoning reform is that land use should be reflective of our values and our shared values. So we are having conversations right now about air quality, about water, about public debt, and about equal opportunity. And I think that all of those, when you look at what zoning reform can do, and its tools like transit zones, it's tools like things like Salt Lake City's done. Salt Lake City has made it easier to build accessory dwelling units, ADUs, small units that are behind a home, next to a home, that end up providing naturally occurring affordable housing over time. So looking at land use, the way that land use can align with I'm going to pick these 4 topics because I think they provide great examples. So water, we're all talking about the Great Salt Lake. We all want to save the Great Salt Lake, our iconic salty lake. Oftentimes we hear this conversation as, oh, if you're building more, growth means more water use. And that isn't true. If we effectively utilize our land and we're better at building cities, whether it's Salt Lake City or throughout the state, if we're better at utilizing the land that we've got, we're going to use less water. So Las Vegas can provide a really, really good case study. Between 2002 and 2021, Las Vegas added 750,000 residents. And at the same time, they drove down water use 48% per capita. So growth does not equal more water use if we're making effective decisions. That's not all due just to zoning, but it was effective land use partnered and paired with other effective water conservation strategies. But density in and of itself, if it is done right, can promote better water usage because you get an economy of scale. So the second thing is air quality. And I love that we're talking about transit zones today because we all talk about public transit, but oftentimes the communities that need access to transit the most don't have access to transit. And the affordability requirements that are built into these transit zones provide an opportunity for folks that are on that bubble or on the edge of that knife where owning a car is expensive. And we often don't talk about that. One of the things that our organization has been pushing for is to get Apple and Google Maps to include the time to park when you're putting in your directions to go downtown. So if you're going to a concert at the Delta Center, if you plug it into FrontRunner, it's going to tell you about 48 minutes if you're coming from Ogden. If you put it into Google Maps, it's going to tell you 40 minutes, but it doesn't tell you that you're going to spend 25 minutes circling the block looking for cheaper parking than you'll find under the Delta Center or at the Gateway. And if you're coming to Salt Lake, you should be paying for parking. I'll get into that in a little bit. But so these transit zones align with our values and they go hand in hand with zoning because you're talking about pretty comprehensive upzoning that also provides neighborhoods where people don't have to drive everywhere. One of my pet peeves that I see with some of the developments that we have is that we build these big parking structures in a self-contained building. So there's a grocery store in the bottom, there's a barber shop in the bottom, and then we're building a giant parking garage on the back so that folks can drive to work, come home, and stay there. They don't get out into the city, they don't support our businesses, and they don't support our public transit. So building better developments through transit zones is one of the ways that we can drive ridership of FrontRunner up, drive ridership of Trax up, and bus rapid transit, which is extremely important. And I'm excited about what Ogden's been able to do with theirs. So the third thing is public debt. As you can imagine, building streets is incredibly expensive. And the further a street is away from your downtown core, the more expensive it gets to maintain. And so we have millions and millions and millions of miles of streets that we are obligated and that future generations are obligated to maintain. If we're building a 10-mile road to get you to a single family home, there is no way that a single family neighborhood will ever pay for the amount of infrastructure that we're putting out into rural areas or into areas that I would classify as sprawl. But when you look at some of these developments that are happening in these transit zones, they're creating those urban cores that can lead to a better lifestyle. And so looking at these investments as not only an investment in immediate housing needs, but in long-term reduction of the need for public assets like building an extra lane on a road because you've got bike lanes, because you've got walkability, because I can walk to FrontRunner and ride to Spanish Fork, you can keep me off of I-15 and hopefully not have to add lanes to I-15. And then the last thing is just looking at equal opportunity. I mentioned redlining at the beginning, but one of the things that is particularly pernicious about zoning is that it really did create and drive outcomes for families for generations. whether it was through the destruction of historically Black neighborhoods, whether it was through strategic disinvestment by keeping investment out of neighborhoods or intentionally driving the value of neighborhoods down. We sapped wealth out of communities, and we, in the process, eliminated generations of opportunity. And so what we have the potential to do through zoning reform is to fix that and to begin to heal that legacy and create one where we can have inclusive zip codes, where regardless of your income, you can live in a good neighborhood, in a neighborhood that is walkable, and in a neighborhood that really can celebrate both your cultural identity and your individual needs as a person. So I think of the CNAs or the nurses or the people that all work up at the University of Utah. It is my belief that those wonderful neighborhoods of Yalecrest, of Capitol Hill, of Glendale, any neighborhood should be welcoming of you regardless of your income, and you should be able to find housing near your employer or near opportunity. And that's what zoning reform will allow us to do in the long term. So I mentioned that land use has historically been exclusionary. If you don't believe me, I have a reading suggestion for you. I would encourage you to read Arbitrary Lines by M. Nolan Gray. I think it lays out the history of zoning and land use in a way that really will shape your opinion of zoning. It should hopefully shape your opinion. So the last thing that I kind of want to highlight is that transit zones can align with goals that feel like they're kind of out there in the ether. And I want to give a shout out to Salt Lake City's redevelopment agency for incentivizing and realizing the construction of 3-bedroom and larger units. It's been several hundred. I don't have specific numbers, but several hundred have been created just in the last couple of years, which, looking at the development market, the bigger a unit is to build, the more it costs to build. I know that makes sense. And so there's a gap there as well. And when we look at our school district looking at closing schools, it's a result of there not being family style housing that's affordable and attainable in neighborhoods where you're seeing a decline in population or in child population. So we created SLC Neighbors with a really, really strong vision for the future. And I realize I'm not in the nuts and bolts. I love the nuts and bolts, but there are plenty of people who are more qualified to talk about nuts and bolts than me. I'm very, very interested in our values as a society, as a public. And after having spent some time in public leadership, I think what we're trying to do is align values in public policy. And so things like transit zones, upzoning, and I have a couple of others that we'll talk about in a second, but that is what we're working on. And so the vision that we are interested in at SLC Neighbors for More Neighbors, one thing that I think is very important when we talk about housing is to not fall into the trap of having to choose between affordability, tenant protections, and historic preservation. They all work well together. We can do all of them simultaneously. We're not picking and choosing. So we're not talking about tearing down historic neighborhoods, but what we are talking about doing is making investments that will strengthen the legacy of those neighborhoods. So if we can make a beautiful, wonderful historic neighborhood more inclusive, we've made that neighborhood stronger by default. If we can make sure that you can age in place and stay there, or that you can find a place to rent as you get started in your career or as you're in school, that only strengthens a neighborhood. It doesn't weaken a neighborhood. As much as I love walking through big, beautiful neighborhoods, neighborhoods are defined by the people who live there, not by any specific architecture or the buildings. It's the people that are there. And if we pour amber over neighborhoods and don't allow them to change, we're doing a disservice to those neighborhoods in the long term. So ignore the false choices that we constantly hear. The second is, I'm going to go back to healing the legacy of redlining and creating opportunity for the next generation. So the other thing that zoning reform is allowing us to do, and that Salt Lake City is a pioneer on right now, is creating new ownership opportunities. It's often joked that millennials and Gen Z are not an ownership generation. But quite frankly, they don't have anything to own because we haven't built enough units. We haven't built them styles of housing that are even attainable for ownership. And so as we look to the future, one of the things that zoning reform, both in Salt Lake City and elsewhere, can do is promote new models of ownership or beneficial rentership, because not everyone wants to be tied to a place. Some folks are truly nomadic at heart, and we salute them. We want them to be able to find housing wherever they go. So another thing is really looking at beautiful and accessible cities. One of my case studies for zoning reform that I just love to talk about is Central 9th. It's 900 South and 200 West, talking about one of the transit zones that's proposed. This neighborhood in the last 5 years has transformed in a way that is truly spectacular. So I'm a cyclist. I ride a bike everywhere. When they finish the 9-line trail, it's like my new favorite thing. But the Central 9th neighborhood, I had the experience the other day of having coffee at Blue Copper Coffee, which sits right on the tracks line at 2nd West and 9th South. And there's this wonderful experience of sitting there, and the place feels busy. Every part of that neighborhood feels busy. There's people walking dogs, people going to the coffee shop, people going over to cycle and going to the exercise gym across the street. There's townhomes, there are owner-occupied houses, there's rentals. It's a neighborhood that feels alive, that feels like it's the center of a place. And it feels like Central 9th has an identity because of what zoning reform has done for that neighborhood. And it's something that could easily be replicated in other parts of the city and other parts of the county and the state. So the last point on zoning reform, I've covered them all, I apologize. So I have a call to action for everyone. Transit zones, in my opinion, are, when I say the lowest hanging fruit, I don't mean lowest hanging fruit in terms of effort or energy. They were a lot of work. They were excellently designed. I'm sure that they will take additional work in the future to refine and make perfect. But as far as low hanging fruit goes, they provide a down payment on then what is possible for a city. So the organization that I work with, we've come up with 4 goals, 4 overarching campaigns and goals. We're focused on Salt Lake City right now, but all of these can very easily be applied to cities. So the next thing that we're hoping that Salt Lake City will do is to tackle parking mandates. So parking mandates are essentially a requirement that the government establishes telling a developer how many parking units that they have to have in a given development. The dirty little secret is that the development community and the market will build parking that it sees that it needs. And so what we're hoping is to eliminate those mandates from within government code and have the market determine those parking needs. And in an area like a transit zone, if a developer decided, 80% of my residents are going to ride the train, ride a bike, or walk to work because they can take advantage of 150,000 square feet of office space and retail space in their neighborhood, then they shouldn't be required to build parking. I believe that the market can really determine those needs. And it frees up valuable land for an opportunity to build even more housing and more commercial space. So the second would be to utilize small and irregular lots. In a city, especially a city like Salt Lake City, infill development is essential because we don't have any more green spaces really that can be developed, especially for housing. Nobody's going to end up living in the Northwest quadrant. Nobody's going to live in the middle of the inland port. We don't want people to build giant apartment buildings on top of the Bonneville Shoreline Trail. And so when you look at the city, the developable area of the city is much smaller than it looks like on a map. And so we have to utilize every piece of land possible to the best effect possible in order to meet our housing needs and our economic development needs. And Salt Lake City's done a really good job on this. They passed a policy last fall called RMF 30, residential multifamily, 30 feet tall. Basically, these are townhomes, cottage courts, that missing middle density, if you will. And we've already seen a ton of projects coming online from that development. One of the best parts of this policy is that it threads that needle of preserving existing structures and allowing for infill development. And so my organization would like to see that become the baseline zoning in Salt Lake City, that single family zones would no longer exist. RMF 30 would become the baseline zoning for the city. The third is utilizing public lands. Salt Lake City government and a lot of different governments own a lot of land. And certainly we don't want every piece of property that a city owns to immediately be turned into a development. There's important things like parks and public spaces, future development needs, public spaces for like public buildings, those kinds of things. But what we're encouraging is for Salt Lake City to really inventory and create a priority list for the public lands that they do have. And this is also important for things like the Salt Lake City School District. When I say Salt Lake City, also looking at the school district. If they close 7 elementary schools, those are very big pieces of land generally in the middle of neighborhoods that historically formed the heart of a neighborhood. They should be putting that land back up for redevelopment and making sure that if the reason we're closing schools today is because we don't have enough kids, that seems to me to be a really good reason to make sure that that land is reused in a way that could bring families back into the city. And then the last thing is just upzoning everywhere. And so what we mean by this, and it's different for each city, and context matters, but there are things that can happen within a city that don't change the character of a city. So as an example, I think it was South Jordan that was mentioned, that triplexes look like single family homes. Historically, and I'm going to talk specifically about Salt Lake City, historically in Salt Lake City, you saw duplexes, triplexes, all kinds of weird little developments, 4plexes, 6plexes. If you go walk through the avenues, or you go walk through Central City or Liberty Wells, or any of our strongest neighborhoods, the neighborhoods where people want to live, they're covered in all kinds of different developments, from big towers to small little triplexes. And I would argue that that is what determines the character of those neighborhoods, that you have a mix of incomes, you have a mix of ethnicities, you have a mix of national backgrounds. All kinds of people from all over the world can call these neighborhoods home because there is a different housing type to meet everyone's needs. Unfortunately, from a policy perspective, in the 90s, we downzoned our city. And what practically that means is we eliminated duplexes and triplexes from being built in most parts of the city. And so 30 years later, we're dealing with the consequences of that. What we're working on, and one thing I would encourage folks to take away from this conversation, is that upzoning looks different based on context, but duplexes and triplexes can easily fit in a single family neighborhood and look just like that neighborhood. The second thing would be looking at ADUs, allowing for accessory dwelling units in just about every part of a city can essentially accomplish the goal of building duplexes citywide. And then the last thing is when a city approves a master plan, one of the frustrating things, and this is as a community council chair, one of the things that's particularly frustrating to me is oftentimes we approve a master plan, which is going to guide the future of the neighborhood, but we don't approve the underlying zoning changes that that master plan calls for. So when you look at 900 West in Glendale, most of 900 West is essentially going to become RMF 30. So you'll see townhomes rise there. You'll see some taller buildings. We may end up with 45-foot tall buildings. But what's happened is we've approved a master plan, and now it's up to each individual developer when they have a project to come in and make that zoning request, which means a year or two of going through the zoning process. And so that's something when we think about strategic upzoning, that for me would be another example of some low-hanging fruit, that if we're going to approve a master plan, which goes through a public process, goes before the mayor and the council, that we should also be looking at the underlying zoning to really facilitate the type of development that's called for under that plan. So that's all that I have. If you're interested in the work that we're doing, you can go to slcneighbors.org, and we have policy briefs on all 4 of these priorities that really dive into the specifics of what we're trying to do.
So if I could, I just wanted to make a quick comment. One of the things that I do in addition to working for Utah Transit Authority as a trustee is I also sit on the Commission for Housing Affordability. And one of the elements that I think is really a constant discussion is how do you navigate the challenges. Communities have different faces, different feels. I was a city councilwoman in Bountiful City, and I have had multiple people during my 3 terms tell me to my face that it was horrible for me to do an apartment building in a certain area. And then literally in the next breath, oh, I wish my kids could afford to live here. It really is a discussion. And I think that what we all have to kind of consider doing is maximizing what we have. We are geographically constrained. We are obviously constrained by population because it's already been built out to a certain extent. And so I think by utilizing the options that we are looking at policy discussions, housing discussions, all of those I think are really well framed. But we have to continue the dialogue, and it is hard, and there is not always an easy solution, especially when you are wearing that elected hat and you have people that are upset. People that are upset typically because they are concerned, they just don't understand, or they're like, what if change is hard? And so I think by continuing to have dialogues like this is really going to become our biggest asset. I would say the state of Utah does an incredibly good job of really trying to work together. Now, I know there's political comments and I get that. But really, I've known Miranda for years. We as an agency work with our metropolitan planning organizations so that we're looking out at 2050. We're trying to figure out how we can be of help to the communities that we serve. And I think I don't want to speak for Miranda, but I would think that she would agree. And I think by talking to our communities and understanding their needs and understanding how Salt Lake City is different than South Jordan or Vineyard or Murray for that matter, or Bountiful, having those conversations, I think is going to be really critical. And so I just wanted to thank everyone for all of those comments. It is not easy, but you know what? It's worth it.
All right, are there any questions in the audience? Or
I have a really basic question. The affordable housing, is it all rental or could it be purchased, owned housing as well?
That's a great question. I'm happy if you want to take it. Right now, there is not a definitive decision in regards to that. In other words, we are not dictating that as an HTRZ committee. So if there's a project and it has rentals, if it meets all the criteria legally, then it's applicable to that particular development. But that being said, middle income or missing middle housing, I always get those wrong. That is a key component, and part of that is the for sale product. And there's definitely a drive to make sure that is part of the discussion moving forward.
I would also just add, I know that a lot of that's been created has been rentals, but I know our mayor, for instance, is really pushing, hey, I want to see a mix of owner and rental. I think that's the case in a lot of cities.
I know for us, we define it in our applications as residential units, but there is a hope that they will include some ownership opportunities.
I have a follow-up question. Well, actually, it's not follow-up, it's different. The housing affordability that's designed here is directed to the middle income, the middle quintile, perhaps, but not the lowest income individuals who are also stressed. What solutions, perhaps more subsidy, more Section 8 type housing for the lowest income people, have you heard about? Are you promoting?
So that's a great question. So on the Commission for Housing Affordability, a piece of that is the 30% AMI and below. And again, average median income. The Wayne Niederhauser actually is coordinating that piece of it. And that is very much part of the framework. In 2022, the 30% and below AMI received $55 million of one-time funding. And that was all going to housing. And this is throughout the state. And then in 2020, maybe it was 2021, 2022, last year, they also received an additional $50 million. And again, that same premise. How can we address the critically needed housing gap that we have? He has literally from homeless to the 30% AMI. It's a big, big difference. There's a lot of discussion about how do all of the communities come together to address some of these critical needs. They are infrastructure needs, they're service needs. There's a lot of challenge to that, but it is being looked at. And there's probably a lot more I could say, but I'm hoping I'm answering your question.
Just to follow up briefly, are those projects or funding for the 30 AMI able to be coordinated at all with the Housing Transit and Reinvestment Zones? Because this population particularly needs to be located near to transit.
That is a nuanced question, and I appreciate it because there's not at this time been an application to address that need specifically. And here is the classic conundrum, right? If you are already in this challenging AMI structure, you can't afford to go where there's more expensive land costs. So you're balancing that out constantly by trying to find land costs that are at least doable. And so with that in mind, it does not always gear towards where UTA has transit, certainly where other transit agencies across the state, like Cache Valley, St. George, it doesn't always gear to that. It is a hope and it's somewhat of an intention. And part of the development that UTA has done, that 10 to 12 to 15% affordable that goes in there, the goal is to really develop a structure, and I know the cities can answer this even better, that has a mix of incomes. That's the ideal model, because then you are not saying this is all one or the other. And that, I think, is something that all the communities are working on.
And I would just add on that we cannot subsidize our way out of a supply issue. That if we have a 60,000 unit shortage statewide, we will never be able to meet those needs, because what you're going to have happen is you're going to have people with higher incomes. I have a good friend that works at Goldman Sachs who pays $800 a month for an apartment in the Avenues. Very grateful that he found really affordable housing, but making $125,000 a year, we want him to move up. We want a building with amenities that will draw him out and to pay just a little bit more of his income in rent. But because what ends up happening is you're going to have, if you have fewer units, you're going to have more competition for the units that exist, and the dollar is going to win out. So someone that can pay more of their income for housing is going to be able to outcompete someone at the lower end of the spectrum. And without the units, the market is naturally going to go to where it can make money. That's the role of the market. The market does that. And if we understand the incentives of the market, then we also understand how to anticipate needs. And so this, as a second piece of this, I think it's important for government to really look at the land assets that it has to create this kind of housing. The market is going to struggle to create housing at 30% AMI and below because the amount of subsidy that's required to make a unit profitable at that. One of the things that I think Salt Lake City has done well in its affordable housing incentives is lowering the number of required affordable units based on the affordability. So if you're at 80% AMI, it might be 10%. If you're at 30% AMI, it might be 1 unit. But at the end of the day, what we want to do with these incentives is to incentivize the construction of affordable units. So if we can only get one 30% AMI restricted apartment in a neighborhood, as long as what we're doing with our policy is resulting in a net gain of those units, it's positive. And so we should direct incentives to help the market deliver those units that it can, while also acknowledging that there has to be a role for government in helping solve this problem because of that subsidy issue.
Seriously, asked 2 of my questions, but I'm particularly ignorant. I'm particularly ignorant, so I need to kind of understand a little bit better, because we're talking about the market, but then we also keep talking about incentivizing developers. And so I'm kind of, first off, so how long do they get to have the subsidy, the developer? How does that kind of work? Walk me through it like a 5-year-old, because I practically am, and help me understand how that really works and how long it lasts, because it doesn't feel like the developers are struggling. So help me out.
Yeah, so with HTRZs, it's tied to the time of the life of the HTRZ. So for your ones next to front runners, it'd be a 45-year period.
No, 25.
They have to be deed restricted. So whatever units are affordable, they have to be deed restricted for the life of the HTRZ, which would be its 25 years a parcel, up to 45 years. In front runner, in a Trax or BRT, it's 15 years, 30-year period. So they have to be deed restricted for the life of the incentive. And that's a lot of the problems with the government being involved. Is I was just meeting with a group called Call to Action, I believe they're called. They're working with Ivory on affordable, on just this issue. And they're working with South Jordan on different projects where they actually are going to deed restrict for a 99-year period. So it's true, just affordable housing. And so a lot of that is working with these private companies, Ivory, the Maverick, to do for them and their foundations to help offset this problem too. So it's kind of a true public-private partnership where you help have that incentive for a longer period of time. But yeah, it's tied directly to whatever the life of the HTRZ is.
I'm sorry, because I know a lot of people in here are really smart about this. So for 90 years, I'm going to get 30% of what I could get for the rent. And in exchange, I'm getting taxes that I don't have to pay that are equal to that amount. Is that kind of what you're
So that for the HTRZ,
Sorry, I just
yeah,
don't
no, for the HTRZ, it would be, it's a post-tax incentive. So you would pay your property tax. And then in the HTRZ, so let's say I'm a developer and I own a 200-unit apartment and I pay $2 million a year in taxes, or $1 million a year in taxes. I pay that $1 million. And then with the HTRZ, $800,000 or up to $800,000 goes to the HTRZ that can then be paid back to me to offset me having that affordable unit. There's also all the other things that could go towards, but yeah, the parks, infrastructure upgrades, parking structures. But yeah, so I would still pay the taxes as a developer, and then I would deed restrict 10%, 12. And so they'd have to be income qualified. So just like Kate mentioned, for a 1-bedroom, one person, you're looking at 60% AMI would be $44,000. So they have to make $44,000. And then the rent is also capped based off of HUD requirements or different things where, like, let's say they can't be more than $1,100 a month is what your rent is. So you would get that for as long as the life of the HTRZ. And sorry if I'm getting a little.
But also, I kind of just assumed all along that there was a rental cap. There isn't, unless you're just capping who you'll let move in there.
So it's both.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. You have to be income qualified to qualify for the unit, but then also the amount you're paying every month is capped. And that prevents friends that are making $150,000 from saying, I'd rather pay $1,100 than $2,300.
I have a question. I was wondering, I forgot quite which plan it was. It was the 400-foot building. I think you said was going to be 20% affordable housing. Do I have that right?
So the 400-foot building is in a different HTRZ than the area that will be 20%. We haven't determined what percentage of the units we would like to have be affordable in that particular one.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, that's still on that same question. I guess this is really your personal opinions. Do you think 20% is enough? I guess I'm just trying to figure out how that exact percentage was gotten to, and in the case that we could have much more part of that as affordable housing, do you think it would take policy?
So the HTRZ Act has a 10% requirement. Within the RDA, we have what we call the Housing Development Loan Program, and it has affordability percentages. So as has been mentioned, we'd like a mix of incomes to occur within a development so that we have a variety of people living together, learning from each other, and growing as a community. And because of that, we have a higher than 10% that we'd like to have affordable within our housing development loan program. And so we matched that with our first application with going to the 20% area. Did I answer that?
Yes. Do you think it should be more?
So going back to the big issue is that pencil word, right?
Yeah.
So I know in the South Jordan and in the South Salt Lake application, they looked at, so when a developer builds an apartment building, a lot of times what they're looking for is holding on to it for 10 years, 15 years, and then selling that product. That's kind of a lot of the reason why they develop it. And the amount that they're able to resell that building for, having that kind of those affordable units, I want to say in South Jordan, it might have been the loss in value was $47,000 a unit. So you take that and times that by $2,000, it's a really big gap and a really big delta in going out and getting financing, traditional financing. So I think that sometimes that is the issue with having more affordability. But I know, and Beth mentioned this, that kind of that mixed income level. So we're working with a developer who they're going to have plus market apartments, right? So really high end, above market, and then 25% and that 40% AMI. And then I don't want to do fast math here, 35% in 80% AMI. So kind of having that mixed income level helps the project pencil and is able to provide more affordable units and also for different levels of AMI. So it's, and maybe Beth could add more to that, but yeah, it's that going back to making sure that that project pencils.
At the end of the day, cities, counties, the state do not develop. So you really have to make sure that you still create a viable market for these properties because they do change hands and they do have different business models that they adhere to in order to maximize potential developments. And so it's a great question. How do you determine what that percentage should be? And you really have to kind of draw a fine line. And that's where the HTRZ really tried to do that because number one, it pulls in all the taxing entity partners. That doesn't always happen. And sometimes it can be quite cantankerous, if you will. And so by doing that, you are really being strategic with what it is that you are using on the state funding side. But it's a great question. And I think as Rob was mentioning, it really is, it's a multitude of things that make a development pencil. Like every developer will tell me, I hate when you talk about parking structures because they never pencil. They don't. $30,000 a stall on a multi-leveled parking structure is never going to pay you a dime unless you charge, in which of course, that's a whole nother argument. So, but how do you maximize the opportunities that you do have and you create these zones? And so that's really, I think, what we're trying to do is we're trying to carve this niche into the private market by allowing more people into that market. So that was a big overlaid question. So I hope that I was kind of giving you some stuff.
This is for the folks online. I just want to make sure that we pause and make sure you have an opportunity, if you want to ask a question, to type it into the Q&A field.
Haley, I'd go back to your question too. And this is a conversation that has been ongoing as Salt Lake City's constructed its affordable housing incentives. And this was the major focal point in that meeting where I was pulling my hair out back in May last year, because you had folks there saying that we should be requiring developers to build affordability into projects. That's a policy called inclusionary zoning that has in many cases backfired, because what we don't want to do is to create a situation where developers are building fewer housing units or backing out of projects because we're essentially taxing them by saying it costs you, these are not real numbers, I'm making them up, but for illustrative purposes, if it costs them $100,000 to build every apartment, and then we're saying, 20% of those you have to take this loss on for the next 15 years. So you're not going to make that money back on that project. They're going to walk away from that project. And so we could end up in the goal of creating more affordability, we could end up making our affordability crisis worse because the market won't be building any of those units. So the thing that we've encouraged with the affordable housing incentives is to really make it align with the incentives of the development community as much as possible, because what we want them to do is, so let's say we have 10 developers all building 100 units in different neighborhoods. If some of them agree to build 5 units at 30% AMI and some agree to build 20 at 80% AMI, we've accomplished 25 units of affordable housing in a development that doesn't have to have any affordability and that arguably could make more money if it didn't include affordability. So the goal for my organization would be to spread out those affordable units as much as possible and to get them in as many developments as we can citywide, so that when you're building, even if you're building 4 units, like a townhome structure, if one of them could be affordable, maybe we let you build 6 instead of 4. So we're really trying to bake affordability into the incentives that the market already has to deliver good products. And the thing about the market is very good at meeting the needs that it can get paid for. And so what we have to do is, through public policy, align those affordability goals with that incentive of building more units.
I just wanted to thank you all for coming. I'm Nancy Cantor, and I invited all of you except Turner, and I appreciate your coming. And I want to say that I feel really encouraged by the people involved in all of this, and all of the thought and the work and the concern you have for the community. I came here in 1972 for graduate school. I couldn't have lived on my $200 a month stipend if we had the housing issue we have now. And I was able to get through school just living below poverty level, not running up a huge debt. And I just, hope that there'll be more of that available for people coming up and coming here. Thank you for coming.
Well, just one question, which is, okay, so we're the League of Women Voters and we're our people who care about our community. What should we be doing to help with this vision? What would you call us to do?
I would say show up for pro-housing policy. When the city sticks its neck out, and this is city anywhere, state anywhere, when the city does something bold and tries to tackle a crisis, show up and support it. Because oftentimes what happens is you'll have only folks that are opposed to things that show up, and it looks really bad and it feels really bad to elected officials to look at a room full of 50 people who are saying vote no and turn around and vote yes. But if you get a bunch of people there that are also speaking out in support, it makes it easier for policymakers to get to the right decision because they see a representative cross section of their constituents.
I'd say that for the local level as well as the state level, right? Our state legislature, they meet in January for the annual legislative session, and it's a really great opportunity to go out and learn more about the housing and transportation policies that they're proposing and considering, but again, also being able to weigh in. So there's, many levels at government in which, your voice can be heard and to learn more about these issues. So
I think I'll jump in here because we've kept you far longer than we promised to keep you. Bet you're surprised we're as interested in HTRZs as we are. Well, we know a lot more today than we did before. So I want to thank you all for coming and warn you that this will be on our website and hopefully more people will get to have access to it. We have a few announcements and so on at the end, so I don't want to keep you. Thank you, speakers, members, guests for attending in person and online. Anyone who found tonight's event useful, take a few minutes to share or like related posts on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, whatever it is. Well, I'm sure those are too old. There must be something better. And Shauna has something to add.
Oh, no, I'll show you what you're saying. It's just that. I want to share this because Catherine made it about our socials.
Oh, but we're going to do the meeting after they leave.
Oh, after they leave.
Yeah. So we have a few meeting things that we need to wrap up, and we don't need to make you stay yet longer to listen to League of Women Voters announcements. But those of you online have to stay to listen to League of Women Voters on announcements. And those of you in the audience also have to stay. So thank you very much. Oops. Thank you. So
I'm gonna put up here, I misunderstood. I have a slide from Catherine. On social and I have another slide. So I'll start.
So for League of Women Voters that are still around and haven't either gone to dinner or fallen asleep, we have some upcoming things that we want to make you aware of. We have 2 candidate forums coming up. Tuesday, October 24th at 5:30, Cottonwood Heights City Cottonwood Heights City Council Candidate Forum. This is at Butler Middle School and it's on our calendar. On Thursday, October 26th, also at 5:30, the Sandy City Council Candidate Forum will be held at Sandy City Hall. And so if you are interested in the politics of either Cottonwood Heights City or Sandy City, please show up. I want to thank you for attending. Follow us on these social media spots. Shall I do the unit meeting? Shall I do the unit meetings now? Okay. We will be having unit meetings in the coming weeks. First, there is a Mid-Valley Slack channel, which is asynchronous. Contact Molly Swanger for more information if you are interested in that. Soon there will be a PowerPoint that you will see. Next, there's a Night Owls meeting on the 4th Monday of the month, which is this coming Monday, October 23rd at 7:30 in the Holiday Library and on Zoom. This week, I, retired law professor, am going to lead a discussion about sources of law. The new Night Owls unit meeting is held the 4th Tuesday of the month, which will be October 24th at 7:30 at 826 East Harrison Avenue. The Summit Wasatch County unit meets on the last Tuesday of the month, which is the next Tuesday, October 31st at 11 a.m. So it won't spoil your Halloween trick-or-treating. Finally, the Town Club meets the first Thursday of the month, which will be Tuesday, November 2nd at 11 a.m. in person at the Town Club. The program is followed by an optional lunch with payment and RSVPs in advance. Please contact Kathy Bailey if you are interested. Those are our unit meetings. Our next general meeting will be Wednesday, November 15th at 6 p.m. live and online. This meeting will be more controversial than tonight's meeting was. It will be a panel discussion about the gondola. Will it be built? Should it be built? What is the status? Confirmed speakers are David Fields, CEO of Snowbird, Nathan Rafferty, CEO of Ski Utah. These are proponents of the gondola. Pat Shea, attorney and former director of the BLM. Laura Briefer, Salt Lake City Director of Public Utilities. And maybe there'll be an additional speaker added, but those are the 4 confirmed speakers. As you remember, our September general meeting was about the proposed I-15 expansion. The draft environmental impact statement is now available on UDOT's website. Go and read it. It's really great nighttime reading. I didn't say it would put you to sleep. You might conclude that that's what I meant. UDOT will accept comments on this draft environmental impact statement until November 13th, 2003. And therefore, all of our unit meetings could have some time to conspire together as to what comments individuals might want to submit. Utah Physicians for a Healthy Environment have comments posted on their website that they submitted back in January. So that might be a reference. Finally, as you know, we've taken a position about the quarry in Parley's Canyon. The Division of Air Quality, DAQ should be coming out with its final plans any minute now. And when they do, we'll let you know in the weekly briefing. Finally, for those of you interested and concerned about the Great Salt Lake, which should be everyone, the Utah Physicians for a Healthy Environment and other groups filed a lawsuit against the state over the Great Salt Lake not being, because the state is not adequately planning for sufficient water to go to the lake. So if you're interested in that issue, that's the point person to check out. And unless anybody else in the room has an announcement I should be making, I will say thank you for the marathon meeting. Who expected a marathon meeting on HTRZs? Good evening.